Known for their cinematic storytelling abilities, Japanese role-playing games are among the most celebrated genre in the video game industry and have been since their creation in the 1980s. These games differ from their Western counterpart by employing the Eastern Kisho Tenketsu method to storytelling, which adopts a bottoms-up approach as opposed to the top-bottom style often found in Western RPGs and film. This style allows players to develop a much stronger psychological connection to the protagonists because the narrative slowly reveals the characters' motivations and backstories before revealing the true overarching conflict. Traditionally, this is comprised of 4 sections: introduction, development, twist, and conclusion. While characters are often slowly introduced during the first 2 sections, the twist, aptly named for the shockingly unexpected and sometimes bizarre plot twists, sometimes encompasses the majority of the story. Though the Final Fantasy franchise is but one of many JRPGs to employ this Eastern storytelling technique, it is also known for its recurring use of memory error and trauma as prominent plot devices. As psychologist Ryan Kelly notes, many games in the series include protagonists who suffer one of 3 types of amnesia, which are all rooted in some form of physical or psychological trauma. Furthermore, these memory errors often serve as the single most important aspect of a particular character's psychological state within the overall plot. Their game-long development, rooted in recovery, is crucial in strengthening the bond between the character and the player. Unsurprisingly, associative music plays a significant role in the Final Fantasy franchise. Beginning with Super Nintendo's release of Final Fantasy IV, Nobuo Uematsu began employing leitmotivic soundtracks comprised of character themes and a recurring main theme, both of which often endure some level of transformation over the course of the soundtrack. Though character themes are fairly straightforward in their associativity, symbolism surrounding the main theme is ambiguous, to put it mildly. Edith Lang and George West's 1920 publication for organists accompanying silent film encourages performers to associate a main theme and its transformations with the mood or character of the hero or heroine. Contrarily, in a 1999 interview, Nobuo Uematsu stated that the main theme is the first piece that he composes after reading a game's screenplay, suggesting that he may connect this theme more to the underlying narrative of the game or the, quote, intangible aspect of the story, to borrow a term from composer Winifred Phillips. Indeed, this term main theme has been attributed officially and unofficially to many different tracks, including title music, opening credits, world map exploration, or simply the most oft-heard music in a game or film, regardless as to whether or not it endures subsequent transformations. Beginning with Final Fantasy IV, Uematsu began to blur the rhetorical boundaries between character themes and main themes, resulting in a curious type of musical and narrative ambiguity. These techniques often surround characters who are victims of traumatic and memory-altering experiences. Ultimately, this leads to fascinating narratological questions. If the main theme of a game, which often reflects the story's narrative, is somehow connected to a character theme, then what symbolic connection and interpretation may be garnered when these themes are seemingly combined? I have identified 5 different compositional techniques found in Uematsu's soundtracks that contribute to this sense of associative ambiguity. This results in a type of thematic disassociation, which surprisingly helps to reveal the story's underlying narrative. Among these techniques are eponymous omission, which occurs when certain characters lack eponymously named themes. This is especially pertinent when a character is the only character lacking a theme, or if a specific character is the only character with such a theme. Motivic networking, whereby a composer motivically connects a character's theme with the game's main theme, often in a subtle manner. Thematic hybridization, where complete phrases of different themes are combined. Associative troping, which occurs when a theme's association gradually changes over the story through topical shifts, resulting in cinematic and musical tropes. And the double idée fixe, which occurs when a game contains 2 different main themes, each with its own musical association and symbolism. Unsurprisingly, these techniques are often combined together, further enriching the symbolism within a given soundtrack. In this paper, I address these different techniques within Uematsu's leitmotivic Final Fantasy soundtracks. These techniques lead us to discover new leitmotifs, which provide us with the necessary insight to decipher the true underlying narrative themes within these loved stories. Final Fantasy IV employs 2 recurring themes over the game: the main theme, and various transformations of Red Wings. The main theme does not incorporate typical heroic topics, leading one to speculate that it has less to do with heroism and more to do with something deeper and more complex. Though leading protagonist Cecil does not contain an eponymous theme, Sean Atkinson depicts how Red Wings transforms into Paladin Knight once Cecil renounces evil, suggesting that Red Wings does in fact belong to Cecil. However, Red Wings also appears in other scenes not exclusively associated with Cecil, the most common being Cry of Sorrow Part 1, which accompanies tragic plot points. This track is always followed by Cry of Sorrow Part 2, which is a melancholic transformation of the game's main theme's A section. Marrying these two phrases together is an example of thematic hybridization that suggests a deeper connection between Cecil and the game's underlying narrative. This connection is confirmed during the game's ending credits sequence. Here, the A section to Red Wings is answered by the B section to the main theme. Thus, the redemption that Cecil experiences through his transformation is combined with the game's main theme, musically suggesting that redemption is the game's underlying narrative. Uematsu's techniques matured to an interesting level of subtlety in Final Fantasy V. The main theme endures 4 transformations within the first 10 minutes of gameplay, all of which utilize different topics and accompany scenes depicting different characters. This suggests that the main theme represents something deeper than simple character association. We first hear the main theme in the title credits accompanying Bart's riding his chocobo, making prominent use of the hero topic in the A section. The B section moves to the surprising key of the dominant minor, providing a new lyrical melody, before eventually concluding and looping back to the beginning. This B section foreshadows Princess Lena's eponymous theme, which is comprised of a single melody in the singing style whose antecedent phrase is motivically derived from the main theme's B section. Lena's music concludes with a nostalgic music box statement of the game's main theme. The process of thematic hybridization and motivic networking here suggests a strong narratological connection between Lena and the main theme. The transformation of the hero topic into one of nostalgia suggests that Lena's past is somehow connected to the heroic narrative imbued within the game's opening music. Indeed, it is not until the final act of the story that we learn the significance of the musical connection. During a flashback, we learn that when Lena was a child, her mother had a fatal illness that could only be cured by the tongue of the windrake, an endangered species of dragon. Though Lena tried to kill the last remaining windrake to save her mother, her father's servant stopped her. She learns that her mother would rather die than kill the last remaining dragon. In this traumatic event, Lena learns the true meaning of heroism and dedicates her life to saving the species. Here, it is suggested that the intangible aspect of the game's narrative is heroism through self-sacrifice. This view is reaffirmed in the scene's musical accompaniment, Sorrows of Parting, a melancholic tune comprised of 3 8-measure phrases. Through the developing variation process, we see that the melody's presentation phrase is motivically derived from the consequent phrase of Lena's theme, which is further fragmented in its continuation phrase. Though Lena's theme does not endure any transformation like the main theme, its own melody is the product of, and contributes further to, the developing variation process, which ultimately acts intrinsically with the drama, thus satisfying Matthew Bribitzer-Stull's criteria for the genuine leitmotif. From the beginning of the story, the main theme and Lena's theme are motivically and topically connected, but their narrative connection remains unknown. When players learn of Lena's past, however, the nostalgia and heroism imbued in these two themes finally blend into one. What results is a slight variation on David Neumeyer's tropological shift in cinema. Here, what occurs is not two opposing interpretations of a single piece of music, but a completed interpretation of 3 musical tracks, thus completing our understanding of their musico-dramatic connection. In the interest of time, and because I've presented on this topic elsewhere, I will forego a lengthy discussion of these techniques within Final Fantasy VI. What I will say, however, is that through the various motive, harmonic, and topical characteristics, Final Fantasy VI's main theme, as depicted in Omen, is initially associated with the game's antagonist, Emperor Gestal. Its subsequent transformations begin to strip the theme of its topical and motivic association from Gestal and align them closer with Terra, one of the game's leading protagonists who suffers amnesia due to a traumatic mind-controlling experiments that she endured at the hand of the Gestal Empire. Through the developing variation process, accompanimental figures heard in the strings of the main theme's first iteration, Omen, expands in the string accompaniment within Awakening, and finally blossom into the unique B section played in the horn, heard in Terra's theme, which musically depicts the hope that the rebellion sees in her, which I argue is the underlying narrative of the game. In the game's ending credits, Uematsu provides a curtain call for each character accompanied by their own theme. For Terra, the B section initiates her vignette, which is followed by the main theme proper. Through what Hatton refers to as the process of abnegation, we see how this music elevates the entire dramatic discourse of the game from a heroic tragedy to one of spiritual transcendence. In perhaps the most notorious example of trauma and memory error in the series, Final Fantasy VII's Cloud Strife suffers dissociative amnesia and false memory syndrome as a combined result of his traumatic childhood, later genetic experimentation, and the death of his best friend, Zack Fair. He unknowingly adopts Zack's identity and is simultaneously led to believe that he is a failed clone of the villain Sephiroth. These plot points, remarkably, are all foreshadowed and reflected in the game's soundtrack. Though Uematsu provides themes for almost every character in the game, Cloud is the only one who lacks clear musical association, possibly a reflection of his identity crisis. This has led many to suggest that the main theme is in fact Cloud's theme. Though I disagree with this assessment, I do believe that his leitmotif is embedded within the main theme, which is the longest and most formally complex of Uematsu's Final Fantasy soundtracks. Beginning in G major, we first hear motive X, or the main theme proper, immediately interrupted by motive Y, comprised of a short two-note statement oscillating between F minor and its chromatic submediant D flat minor. This Y motive, I argue, is Cloud's leitmotif and light harmony. Motive Y consists of three significant sub-motives: harmonic movement of a third, YH, a melodic motion of an ascending minor second, YM, and a melodic movement of a descending third, YHM, which itself is based off the melodic movement of the chords. Remarkably, these three submotives are what differentiate the various transformations of the main theme as a non-leitmotivic cyclic theme from Cloud's genuine leitmotif. To be sure, Cloud's YM and YHM motives are only found in transformations of the main theme that directly refer to Cloud's past: Anxious Heart, On That Day 5 Years Ago, and Who Am I? Likewise, non-leitmotivic transformation of the main theme mostly consists melodically of motive X, with the common use of the YH motive consisting of diatonic and chromatic submediant triads. In this way, Uematsu harmonically unifies the various transformations of the main theme, connects Cloud directly to the main theme, and musically aids the player in exploring Cloud's past and his subconscious. These short videos demonstrate all three transformations of the main theme embedded with Cloud's leitmotif and light harmony that exclusively accompany scenes depicting his traumatic recall of events or his recovery. The soundtrack to Final Fantasy VIII is unique in that, according to the composer, it does not contain a main theme. Indeed, it was during his time composing for Final Fantasy VIII when Uematsu realized that he had an unconscious predilection for using the main theme as the world map music in all of his previous soundtracks. Although Liberi Fatali was initially composed after reading the screenplay to Final Fantasy VIII, Uematsu decided to forego its use as the world map music, instead using the innocuous and non-transformative blue fields to accompany players as they explore the world. Uematsu also intentionally chose to forego the use of character themes. To make matters more confusing, Uematsu views Eyes on Me, which represents the romantic relationship between Squall and Rinoa, as a second main theme, stating, quote, "Both songs have become the main theme. I myself couldn't decide which one to be the main theme. That's why a main theme does not exist in Final Fantasy VIII." There are a few interesting things to dissect with that statement. First, Uematsu suggests both that there are no main themes and that there are two main themes. In fact, both Liberi Fatali and Eyes on Me are recurring themes throughout the game, reflecting the double ide fix technique. Second, if the main theme is the first piece that Uematsu composes after reading a screenplay, one can't help but wonder whether he writes the music for the opening cinematic title screen or the world map music first. Based on his remarks here, it seems as if the former is the case in Final Fantasy VIII, but the first 3 Nintendo games did not include this type of opening scene. Moreover, the opening scene to Final Fantasy IV is accompanied by Red Wings, not the track officially titled Main Theme of Final Fantasy IV, which accompanies the world map. Uematsu's statement that there is no main theme in Final Fantasy VIII, after employing Blue Fields as the world map music, seems to suggest for him that the world map music should be the main theme. His decision to forego Liberi Fatali as the world map music suggests a reluctance on his part to use music associated with antagonists as such an important theme. It only seems fitting that Uematsu would have this type of compositional crisis for a story where most protagonists suffer amnesia from being overexposed to Guardian forces. However, the inherent ambiguity here may help us decipher the story's most important narrative theme. Though Liberi Fatali translates to fated children, referring to the main protagonists in their collective past, the track's opening phrase, Phytos Lusek Wikos Vinosek, is an English anagram in faux Latin for both succession of witches and love, two of the most important narrative themes in the game. Furthermore, Succession of Witches is the name of the track associated with Ultimecia, the game's leading antagonist. The theme is dramatic and dark, and though it seems to overtly associate with Ultimecia, it covertly points to love as the underlying theme of the game. This is ultimately reflected in Uematsu's refusal to employ such a dark piece as the main theme, and his decision to employ a second main theme that overtly depicts Squall's and Rinoa's relationship. Unlike Final Fantasy IV, the use of the double ide fix does not marry two themes together, but through the text, its hidden anagram, and the use of the second theme, Uematsu suggests that the love shared between Rinoa and Squall is but a mere representation of the game's overall theme of love. Final Fantasy IX marks a return to Uematsu's use of character themes, though the inherent symbolism is no less ambiguous than prior games. The soundtrack makes prominent use of two main themes that endure significant transformation: Princess Dagger's theme and the opening title music, The Place I'll Return to Someday. Although Zidane has his own eponymous theme, its treatment is mostly superficial. Indeed, his traumatic past and future seem to be associated instead with the game's title music. This track enjoys a tripartite function. It evokes a musically nostalgic atmosphere that teleports the player to the medieval and Renaissance age, appropriate for the game's high fantasy setting, while simultaneously transporting players emotionally to their own youth, which is when they likely encountered their first Final Fantasy title. More importantly, I argue, is that it also foreshadows Zidane's own past, something that he spends the entire game trying to remember. In the story's final act, Zidane travels to his dystopian homeworld of Terra, accompanied by its eponymously named theme, itself a transformation of The Place I'll Return to Someday, that combines the fitting nostalgic topic with an interesting New Age aesthetic, resulting in a trope on the former. It is here where Zidane discovers the truth of his past, that he was created as an angel of death to bring destruction to the planet Gaia, which he learned to love. The party travels eventually through Memoria, where Zidane learns more disturbing details of his past, to the Crystal World, the center and life force of the universe that lives within the planet Gaia. Accompanying Crystal World is a dystopian, New Age transformation of the Crystal Prelude, sometimes referred to as the Final Fantasy series' main theme, through its abundance of harmonic and sonic dissonance. This disturbing transformation of the beloved Crystal Prelude provides a unique commentary on both Zidane's and the player's view of the past, memory, and nostalgia. Indeed, though Zidane wanted more than anything to learn about his past, it was not at all what he expected, nor what he had hoped for. The distorted Crystal Prelude reflects this unfortunate realization. That Zidane calls Dagger's theme, Our Song, at the end of the story, reflects his mindset to look forward toward the future and not to dwell on the past. Similarly, the Crystal Prelude holds a significant nostalgic value for the players whose demand for a return to the roots was at least partly responsible for the game's design and compositional choices. By presenting the Crystal Prelude in such a dystopic way during the last dungeon where Zidane essentially confronts his past, Uematsu suggests that while nostalgia may be a nice escape and can bring about pleasant memories, one should not conflate it with a false sense of the past, nor should we dwell on it. This seems to indicate that the underlying theme of the story has to do with letting go of the past and looking forward toward the future. It only seems fitting that this game was the last soundtrack in the franchise that Uematsu helmed as a solo project. Choosing to include this track in the game's final dungeon provides a nice bookend to the entire series, as the original presentation of Crystal Prelude is the music that launched the entire series over a decade prior in 1987. Trauma and memory error have indeed become one of the most common recurring plot devices in the Final Fantasy franchise. It is true that some of the most important moments within these games involve exploring the root of the protagonist's psychological state and their ability to come to terms with traumatic events of their past. Moreover, their personal stories are often mere representations of the game's underlying narrative, which in Uematsu's case is often reflected musically in the game's main theme. And though the term main theme may be riddled with ambiguity, it is precisely because of this character trait that we are invited to conduct further investigation into the semiotic relationship between the soundtrack and the stories that they enhance. As I have demonstrated here today, by combining character themes with main themes through further dissociative techniques, we may not only decipher new leitmotifs within a soundtrack, but we may also come to understand the stories on a completely different level. Thank you.